Go grab a drink, go grab a snack, because it's time to talk about the 19 books that I read in the month of March. Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. My name is Brianna and this is 4 Paws in a Book. I make bookish videos over here on my little corner of the internet, so if that's something that you're interested in, make sure that you hit the subscribe button down below. It is time to talk about the books that I read in March. It started out really slow, but it ended really strong, so we're calling it a win. In March, I read 19 books. I also DNF'd 2 more. Like I said, we started out slow, but we ended off really strong. We had a couple of 5 stars. We had some wins. So overall, we're counting it as a win. And also April is starting out really strong as well. If you're new to my wrap-ups, I talk about my books in the order of the book that I like the least to the book that I like the most, but I'm going to start out with some nerdy stats. If you're not a stats fan, you can jump ahead to just me talking about the books, but I really like talking about this, and also saying that I read almost 6,000 pages in a month is a flex, and I'd like to do that. So I read 5,919 pages. Very, very close to 6,000. It also is my lowest page count this whole year. I went well over 6,000 pages in January and February, so March definitely started out a little bit slower. I finished a book like the very first weekend of March, but then like it took me almost a whole nother week to finish another book. It was a drag at the beginning of the month, but that's okay. For formats, I had 1 volume of manga, I had 14 novels and 4 novellas. I had 17 books that were targeted at an adult audience and 2 books that were targeted at a YA audience. This is pretty standard for me. I read mostly for adult audiences at this point. My star rating was an average of a 3.6, which is okay. I'd like to see it higher, but that's not anything over 3.5. Like, I am considering a win, but I would like to see this a little bit higher. I had 1 1.5 star read. It was my first 1 star or 1.5 star read of the year. I had 2 2-star reads, 0 2.5 star reads, 4 3-star reads, 2 3.5 star reads, 5 4-star reads. So that was a win. 1 4.5 star read and 3 5-star reads. And then I had 1 book that I finished that I did not rate. 4 genres. I read 4 fantasy books, 4 fantasy romance books. I was definitely in my fantasy romance era, 2 horror books, 1 nonfiction, 4 romance, and 4 thriller, which I thought was an interesting statistic. Thrillers have generally not been the like first thing I grab, so having 4 in 1 month was an interesting switch. But hey, you know, we're branching out a little bit. All right, let's talk about the 2 books that I DNF'd first, and then we'll talk about the books that I finished. The first one was Killing It by Mike Bakoven. This is the same author that wrote Fantasticland, and that's one of my favorite horror books of all time. Like, it's very interesting. It has some mixed media aspect to it, and so I went into this one, which is his newer release, with high expectations and was very sorely disappointed. I read about 100 pages of this before I was like, this is not for me. This is actually terrible. You're only in one person's POV and he's just not he's depressing to be in his head the entire time. And it was so chaotic, but in not a good way, if that makes any sense. And there wasn't any multimedia aspect to it. There wasn't any podcast. There wasn't any, like, you know, other perspectives or anything like that. It was just in his head. And honestly, I don't even remember. This was like, I read this on day 1 of Ramadan and like DNF'd it very quickly. Looking at reviews from Goodreads, a lot of people had the same problem with it. They really loved Fantasticland and then realized that like this was just not anything similar to it. So that was disappointing, and yeah, no. The other book that I DNF'd was Ascension, and this was a sci-fi thriller about a mountain that like basically comes out of nowhere. Like, one day it's not there and one day it is. And that seems like, you know, groundbreaking information. See what I did there? So why on God's green earth are we more worried about this guy's marriage than the literal mountain that wasn't there yesterday? We had our priorities all out of whack, and so like there should have been so much tension in this book, so high, like there should have been very high stakes, but I never felt it, so I quickly DNF'd it. Also, the chapters were so long. So now for the book that I finished but I did not rate, and that is Forager by Michelle Dowd. This is Field Notes for Surviving a Family Cult. If I was rating it, would not be very high, but I don't usually rate nonfiction, so you know, there's that. So this book is a memoir about someone who was in a religious cult in, you know, the middle of nowhere. I want to say it was like North Carolina, but I could be very wrong about that. I think this book has a really interesting concept, but unfortunately the execution of it really kind of fell flat. First off, the stories are told in first person present point of view, which is an odd choice for a memoir, because usually you're like recounting past events or something that happened in the past, and not necessarily like trying to relive the trauma, if that makes any sense. But she was like, everything became like first person present. Sometimes when the house is empty, I softly pick up the phone and cradle the handle, checking to see if I can hear anyone talking on the other end. If I can, I wrap the mouthpiece with a washcloth and listen in. It like took you immediately back into the setting rather than trying to recount it and try to like gain a lesson from it or tie it to another portion of the story. It just felt really choppy and really jumbled and just kind of like notes on a page rather than like a fully polished memoir. So unfortunately, like if I was rating this, it would be like 2 stars, but I don't tend to rate nonfiction just because it feels weird, because this is like obviously someone's like personal story and they invested a lot of time and energy into it, and it's like about their own life, you know what I mean? It's not like a fictional story. Like, this is about someone's life, and so putting a star rating on someone's personal life, I just don't personally like doing. I know that there's a lot of people that do, and like, more power to you. That's just a personal preference for me, so it's not rated, but I also don't recommend it. All right, we had a 1 star. Well, 1.5 stars, but it's 1 star on Goodreads. Slaying the Frost King by Candace Robinson and Elle Beaumont. I actually, Betty read this with Cassidy and we both really hated it. It was not a fun time. This is written by 2 authors, and you can tell, I think that each POV is probably written by a different person, and so because of that, the writing is so choppy and not cohesive in the slightest. It also feels very, very YA, but then like with very, very smutty scenes, but these characters act so young. Our Frost King is an absolute jerk. There's never a point in this book where I thought, oh, I would really like our female main character to be with him. There were times where he would be like talking about our female main character's friend, like, oh, she's so much prettier than her, and that's just weird to read. I don't know, it's just not my favorite. Also, there is a chapter in here where he, from his perspective, where he is teaching her how to do a blowjob. And that was a very uncomfortable scene to read. So I don't recommend this book. Yeah, definitely my least favorite of the mortal enemies to monster lovers that I've read so far. Moving on to my 2 stars, I gave Spy Family Volume 6 2 stars. And I think at this point I'm probably going to be taking a break from this series, not moving on for a little while. I just need a break from it. This book was a tale of like 2 parts, and the first half with the tennis match, just, I didn't understand it. I don't understand why it was part of the story. It didn't involve our main characters at all, and also that character was such a pick-me that like I hated it. That book, like, Spy Family does not take me very long to read, and that book took me more than 1 day. Like, I couldn't read it in 1 sitting because I didn't want to. So because of that, I'm gonna probably be taking a break from this series, unfortunately. I also gave 2 stars to No Rings Attached by Rachel Lacey. I read her other one, hold on, Read Between the Lines. I read that one last year and really enjoyed it. I had a good time. These are sapphic romances. They're kind of like, they're very rom-com-y, and this one just did not work for me at all. There was so much in this book that was a little bit ace-phobic? A little bit. So we have this is like fake dating, and I usually love fake dating, right? So our main character is going back home for her brother's wedding, some family event. Yeah, brother's wedding. I think that's what it was. And she had told her mom, like, hey, I'm dating this girl, but like never really went into detail about it. And so then this other girl who's like a friend of a friend is like, yeah, I'll come and like be your date. And then obviously like they're gonna catch feelings. But the girl that came in as the fake date is like, just so you know, I don't do romance, I don't do relationships, like I'm not That's just not who I am, right? And also, I don't necessarily have one night stands because I don't develop an attraction with someone until I get to know them. So probably demi, probably aromantic. It's not on page, but like it's definitely hinting at those things. But by the end of the book, she's like, oh, you fixed me. That was just the relationship I was looking for. Nothing else compared. It wasn't that I didn't like romance. It was just that I was with the wrong people. And I just feel like it really invalidated the whole concept of an ace identity or an aromantic identity. And it just like, I feel like we could have done a lot with that because that's an underrepresented group of people in the LGBTQ community when you look at books and media in general. So I just, why did we have to do that? Anyways, it also just wasn't funny. Like the first book was really funny. It had a very rom-com feel to it. This one didn't. So 2 stars. I think the more that I thought about it was going to be a 3-star. And like then I started writing up my review and I was like, no, the more I think about it, it actually pisses me off. So 2 stars. Moving on to my 3 stars. The first one is Powerless by Lauren Roberts. I read this one as a fantasy romance vlog that I was doing at the beginning of the month. And I think that had I been in high school, this book would have been great. I would have had so much fun with it. But as someone who definitely looks at the world building and the magic system and like the greater world around our main characters, this book really fell flat for me. Now, if you're a character driven reader, especially in fantasy romance, and your thing is like the banter and the relationship between the 2 main characters, the banter is bantering in this book. Let me just put that out there. If you like the banter, you'll probably like this book. However, there are these trials in this book, and nowhere in the book does it explain why these trials exist. It does not explain why this competition exists. It just does. And it does because it furthers the plot of our romance, right? So we needed more for this. I am like partially intrigued to continue on and read the second book depending on how the reviews are, but it's probably one that I'll like get from the library or something like that. Definitely not one that I need to own. I also gave 3 stars to Murder at Spindle Manor. This is one of the Spiffbo books that I'm reading the top 10 finalists, so this is a finalist. It's also the one that's like currently leading in the official competition, so I'm really excited for this. And if you like a murder mystery but like make it fantasy with a little bit of horror, this is actually going to work really well for you. It's a very isolated setting. We're at this manor. It's kind of like Agatha Christie but with fantastical creatures. If that like is up your alley, you'll probably enjoy this. I felt like it got a little bit repetitive because our main character, who's the detective, is going to each individual character and like talking to each character about what is happening, and then someone else dies, and then someone else dies. So the book kind of got a little bit repetitive for me. But like closed door murder mysteries are not necessarily like a book that I absolutely love and will give 5 stars to. If it seems like it's up your alley, I would highly recommend it. Lastly, I gave 3 stars to God Killer by Hannah Kaner. This is one that I had really high expectations for, but I think going into it I probably should have tempered my expectations. I do have a vlog on my channel where I reorganized all of my shelves and read God Killer while I was doing it, so there's a little bit of a review on there if you're interested in checking that out. Here's what I should have known. This book has both buzzwords and anti-buzzwords for me. So it's about gods, it's about this, you know, made up religion, it's about the gods interacting with the people, and so like those are all buzzwords for me. But it's also a journey book, and going on a journey is not something I enjoy very much because it feels kind of redundant. It felt like we were just continually moving. This book is really short and it packs a lot into that book, and I think that if we would have like stretched it out and like stayed in one place for some time, I might have enjoyed it a little bit more. But this was not the book for me. I think so many people really love this book, and so I'm not like, I understand why, I can see why people love it, but for me personally, anytime you say you're going on a journey, it's probably gonna not be one that I love. Moving on to my 3.5 star reads, I had 2 of those. The first one is A Dawn of Onyx by Kate Golden. This is a book that I read during peace talks, I think, and I think this was a really good setup for this fantasy romance series. I do think it reads a little bit younger. There's not a lot of smut in this book, so it almost feels like a YA book, but this is about a girl who sacrifices her life for her brothers, and then she goes and is a prisoner for this Onyx King. She has to use her magical abilities in order to heal the soldiers and the the people of the king's court. And then she kind of like makes this deal that she will do this, but like he has to also care for her family. So it's very much a true enemies to lovers kind of romance. Obviously, like, you don't like him at first, but the tension and the banter is great in this book, and it's a great start to the series. I will definitely continue on with A Promise of Peridot. Next up, I gave 3.5 stars to Done and Dusted by Lila Sage, and this is a book that, like, I don't know why it didn't really hit with me. This has ADHD representation, which is obviously something that I'm always looking for in books, and I think it was done really, really well. This is a cowboy romance, and our main character was a professional barrel racer. She had an injury, and now she's like does not want to get back on a horse, so she actually goes back to her hometown and like is trying to, like, you know, reset her brain, trying to like get over that fear. This has a brother's best friend trope as Luke, who is the town's bad boy and also her brother's best friend. They start, you know, kind of bantering, chatting, doing more than chatting, you know, as one does in a contemporary romance. And I don't know what it was about this book that didn't resonate with me, because it should have. This book should have been a 5-star read, and I think it was just that I never connected to the characters at the beginning, and so I couldn't necessarily, like, I wasn't anxiously awaiting them getting together, if that makes any sense. I don't know what it was. I just didn't connect with the book the way that I wanted to. It is, like, I liked it enough that I will definitely be reading the next book in the series, but I don't know. I don't know what it was about it that I didn't love. Moving on to my 4-star reads. The first two I did talk about quite a bit during my Peace Talks vlog. So that was Untethered Sky by Fonda Lee. This was a really interesting standalone, but it definitely felt like the trailer of a book. And I think that happens a lot with novellas, because this is such a, like, unique world and an interesting storyline and premise, and it felt like it could have been a 400-page book, but we only got 115 pages of it, and so we were only hitting the high points. And I just wanted more from it, but I did like what I read. I also gave 4 stars to The House with Good Bones by T. Kingfisher. This is probably my favorite T. Kingfisher that I've read to date, which is exciting. I realize that I'm leaning more towards her horror stories, less to her whimsical fantasy stories. And that's okay. She writes so many different things that, like, it was bound to happen, that you're gonna pick a side. This has a lot of, like, intergenerational, like, trauma is the wrong word, but I can't think of the right one at the moment. Our main character comes back home, and her house is not the way that she remembers it when she was a kid. Like, there's no personality, there's no eclecticness that used to be there, and her mother is, like, jumping at the smallest noises. And as we go along, as we, like, unfold more and more of the story, we realize that, like, there's something weird about the house happening, and it's a very unsettling book. The entire book, just something feels off, which I really, really love in a horror story. Okay, my battery died, so the angle may have changed. But I was about to tell you about Everyone in My Family Has Killed Someone by Benjamin Stevenson. This is a book that I really didn't know if I was going to like or not. It is that isolated murder mystery kind of thriller, but it was funny. It had a lot of humor in it. It kind of had this satire comedy aspect to it while also still being a murder mystery, and I had so much fun with it. Our main character is a true crime or crime aficionado. He goes to a family reunion, and of course, like, shenanigans, someone's dead. The body is not actually identified. They don't know who it is at first, and so then the longer that the body has not been identified, the crazier things happen. There's, like, a reason why everyone could have killed this person, and it's wild. This book is bonkers. So it's not one that's, like, a really, like, dark thriller or anything like that, but if you're just, like, in the mood for a palate cleanser or something just fun and light while also still being murdery, this might be a good one for you. My last 4-star read was Fangirl Down by Tessa Bailey. And no one saw this one coming, because I've been super hit or miss on Tessa Bailey, and mostly miss lately. Most of her books have just not worked for me, but this one was really, really good. I think at the beginning I was not loving it. I think the main character at the beginning is, like, a very ditzy, pick-me kind of girl, and she kind of gets on your nerves. She's like, you're not as dumb as you think, as you're acting like you are. There's a problem here. So I struggled with the beginning of it, but as we got along, this romance is so cute, and there is type 1 diabetic rep in this, which I don't know that I've ever read another book that had that. I believe that Tessa's niece is type 1 diabetic, so the representation was pretty accurate. I think it was really well done. It didn't, like, overtake the story, but it was definitely a part of her as a character. And here's the thing, like, I didn't think that golf romance was something that I needed in my life, but like Tessa proved me wrong. This was really fun. I don't think it was as steamy as I thought it was going to be, and I don't think that she used quite as many puns as she could have, but still had a really good time with it. Lastly, I gave 4 stars to Stoneheart by Katie Robert. This is a little novella that takes place prior to Neon Gods in the Dark Olympus world, and it is about Medusa and Calypso. And like Medusa is tasked to go and kill Calypso, but then she goes and falls for her instead, and it was sapphic, it was steamy, it was only like 85 pages. It was a good time. Next up, I gave 4.5 stars to Wrong Place, Wrong Time by Gillian McAllister. This book was so good, so entertaining, and like twisty, turny, red strings across the board kind of book. This is about a mother who watches her son murder somebody, and then she wakes up and it's the day before. And so there's this a little bit of Groundhog Day to it. It's not the same day happening over and over again. It's actually like you're progressively going back farther and farther. So it's like 1 day and then 2 days and then 4 days and then a week and then like years back. And the whole thing is her trying to figure out how to change that moment so that her son does not do that. And like all of these little like butterfly aspects of time travel that can change what happens in the moment. And it was so well done. Like this book was so technically well crafted. There's a second POV that happens a little bit into the book, and you're very confused at the beginning why this is a POV character, but then like at the end you're like, oh my gosh, what? It was just so well done. Highly recommend this if you want a like sci-fi thriller type like genre bend. It's definitely a thriller, but because of the time travel aspect, there's some sci-fi aspects to it. It's definitely a little bit speculative. And yeah, this was so good. I don't know why it sat on my shelf for so long. I read this as part of the Rainbow Project, where I read 5 orange books. It's not a complicated concept of a video, but they're fun to do, where I just pick a color and read 5 books off of my shelves with that color. And this was orange. Anyways, my full like live thoughts are in that video. I also gave 5 stars to An Education in Malice by S.T. Gibson. There are reading sprints on my channel as well as a live show discussion about this, because this was the Not Your Mom's Boozy Book Club pick for March. So we read it all on sprints, and then the next weekend we discussed it. And this is like a purely vibes book for sure, and I think I'm in the minority of people that loved this book. This is getting very mixed reviews. Like people are giving this 2 stars, and I don't. I loved it. I loved this book. S.T. Gibson can write. Like her prose is so strong. The way that she just immediately drops you into a story and like paints the picture for you is just so wonderfully done. This book is kind of a vampire adjacent story where our professor of this college, she's like a renowned poetry professor, and she's also a vampire. We have Carmela, who is the senior, and she is the distinguished student. She is this professor's favorite student. And then we have Laura, who is the freshman. She's really wanted to get into this class, and she's able to get in this semester, and like she's also vying for this distinguished position, and so this professor is like trying to rival these 2 girls against each other, but they fall for each other instead. So there's a little bit of a romance. It's not a romance book, but there are some vampires, and I just love the way that S.T. Gibson writes. It's beautiful. It's gorgeous. Here for it all. I gave 5 stars to Rolling in the Deep by Mara Grant. This is the prequel novella to Into the Drowning Deep, which I read last year, and I'm actually planning on rereading it this month, or this upcoming month. So I wanted to read the prequel to kind of get the original story. And this is the story of the ship that went down in Into the Drowning Deep, where they're like hunting for it. And the ship went down because of the killer mermaids. And it's about this documentary film crew that's trying to go out and like search for mermaids. They also bring along a crew of people that dress up as mermaids just in case, just to get their shots, you know. You know, documentaries aren't always true. It's fine. But then there's something in the water. People start disappearing. These mermaids come up onto the ship, and you know, chaos. It's not really a spoiler to say that like the ship goes down, because it's Into the Drowning Deep. Like that's the whole point of it. This was only 128 pages. It was like a 3.5-hour novella. I read it in one afternoon, and it was just like From the very first chapter, I was hooked. I did not want to put the book down. I read it so quickly, and that's why it was 5 stars. So I'm very excited now, knowing this story, the origin story, to go back into the Drowning Deep. And then my favorite book of the month, I love that we're bookending it with these, is Slaying the Shadow Prince by Helen Schurer. I read this one first, and then I picked up Frost King thinking it was going to be similar, and it was not at all. And maybe that's why it was so disappointing. But this book was phenomenal. This book is so quotable. This is the first book that I've read from Helen, but it will not be the last. I have already picked up her Blood and Steel, well, the first book, but I'll probably pick up the rest of the series, let's be honest. This has a stabby female main character, which is one of my favorite tropes in fantasy romance, or it's not really a trope, but favorite character dynamics. Our female main character is a ranger. She is a noblewoman turned ranger, and her family was killed by the Shadow Wraiths. And then our male main character is half wraith, that same group of people, or like, creatures that killed her family. So there's an enemies to lovers, which is obviously pretty common in fantasy romance, but this is done so well, and this book is so quotable. I kind of want to go back. I listened to it on audio, but I kind of want to go back and annotate it. I did a little bit of annotating on this. I don't know if you'll be able to see it, but listen to this. How is it that in a world leached of color, I see you brighter than the sun? When I am this, I see the world around me in black and gray. There is no color, only shades of darkness. But you are a spectrum of color in the shadows. You pull me back towards the light. Phenomenal writing. Phenomenal writing. I loved this. I will definitely read more from Helen in the future. Very excited to pick up Blood and Steel. I know it's probably not going to be quite as good as this, but yeah, love this. Highly recommend it. All right, those are the 19 books that I read in the month of March. Let me know how your March went. Let me know your favorite book of the month. Let me know your least favorite book of the month. That's fun. And if you're not feeling chatty, put a sword emoji for our stabby main characters. That's all I have for you today. If you're new here and you have not yet subscribed, there's a little button that you can do so down below the video. If you'd like to hang out with me more, the links to my Instagram, Goodreads, Twitter, and my Patreon are linked in the description below. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye!